Welcome to the Jeremy Mullins podcast, where we take a deep dive into different educational topics that help you optimize your life. Once again, here we are on season 2. I'm Jeremy, I'm your host. And we're going through the series of nutritional readiness from the FM-22. And today, your first episode. First, man, I feel bad because you're like the first person that's like, hey, I'm going to start a podcast. I want to have you on there.
Hey, what you always say, life gets in the way sometimes, but you just keep going.
You had a baby. That kind of took you out of the
priorities.
If Claire's listening, like Claire, you had the baby, I understand, right?
Yeah, I didn't do anything. My work was bare minimal.
So Brenton Abshire, who is a partner crime inside the Kentucky National Guard, inside our HOF program, wellness program for the last 6 years, 5 years.
Something like
that. We do a lot of stuff together, especially the education that's outside of nutrition. Whether it be the resilience training, whether it be sleep, a lot of that stuff we work hand in hand on. And we are currently at a coaches conference in New Orleans. So we are going to knock out one of these sessions so we can stay on point.
Gotta get those CEUs, keep educating the people.
Yeah, keep learning. So I let off the other day in the first episode. This should flow a little bit better, I think. It was hard for me to read and then, think of the points I wanted to come across. So this way, Abshire can jump in there with, his experience, his points, his opinions, and then I can follow it up. So a lot of times, as we talked about with the readings of these, I want you guys to understand that there is always going to be a gray area a lot of times inside of nutrition and inside of wellness. It's not always going to be black and white. And that's what we're trying to give these examples. A lot of times when you see recommendations, the recommendations are very good in a broad statement, right? But as we always talk about inside of education, who is the audience that you are talking to?
Yep.
And I think as a I don't want to say a reader, but someone who ingests knowledge, you should always look at how does this apply to me, right? So how does this apply to my future self? How does this apply to me? Is this education or this platform that I'm getting my information from, talking to me?
Yeah.
Right. Because there is a difference between nutrition for bodybuilders, nutrition for bariatric patients, but nutrition for an 80-year-old versus a 20-year-old. It matters. It's different. And as you like to say, words matter.
Words do matter.
All right. Going to pick this up. Eat grains, especially whole grains, that meet the following requirements. Recommended intake: at least half the grains soldiers consume should be whole grains. A healthy eating pattern includes whole grains and limit the intake of products made from refined grains, especially those high in saturated fats, added sugars, sodium, such as cookies, cakes, and some snack foods. The grains food groups include simple foods such as rice, oatmeal, popcorn, as well as products that include grains as an ingredient. For example, breads and cereals and pastas. Grains are either whole or refined. Whole grains, for example, brown rice, quinoa, and oats contain the entire kernel, including the endosperm, the bran, and the germ. Refined grains lack bran and germ and will remove all dietary fiber and iron and other nutrients. Okay. And I think, this is a point we always talk about, like that's going a little bit into the weeds unless you have a science background in nutrition. But the takeaway for me is don't eat processed foods.
I mean, that's very simplistic, right? That was a whole paragraph of a lot of fluff talking about popcorn as a food.
Yeah.
Which that's what stuck out to me.
Hey, listen, my kids get plenty of grains in them with their popcorn.
So it's a good thing. And that's where I think it's in Germanization and all these other things, fancy terms, right? Very simplistic. What I get out of that is moderation.
Yep. As a rule of thumb, stay away from processed foods, right? But if someone wanted to consume, and I always use maple brown sugar oatmeal, that would be a simple carbohydrate in a sense, but it's still better than probably Pop-Tarts. And if you were doing, a package of maple brown sugar oatmeal and you were eating it with 3 or 4 eggs and some blueberries, I would still say that was a good breakfast.
Yeah.
Versus,
and most time when people are going to eat oatmeal.
Correct.
For breakfast
or when they're traveling, right? So that's, you hear this and it's like, oh, it has to be quinoa or it has to be steel cut oats. That's not the case, right? But just knowing those are the differences from that. Now, the key nutrients: whole grains are a great source of dietary fiber, minerals, vitamins. Whole grains vary in their dietary fiber content. The more refined grains are enriched in the nutrients in that process will add back iron and generally the B vitamins. Okay, so when you hear the term enriched grains, that is also usually referring to refined grains. And, I think of that with like most of our cereals on the front of it, it'll say enriched because they're adding those nutrients back in. Considerations when consuming whole grain products, the whole grain should be the first or second ingredient. For the foods with multiple whole grain ingredients, they should appear near the beginning of the ingredient list. Why is that?
Well, for us, I think it's simple, right?
Yeah.
But for everyone, food labels can be very confusing. And I think that they are there for a reason. They're confusing for a reason because they want you to buy it for that specific reason. However, going back to your question, now correct me if I'm wrong, because this is not my lane, this is your lane.
Yeah.
Food labels, it's his lane.
If you remember this.
Whatever is at the first is the highest percentage of what the food is being made up of. So the ingredients, if you got 10 ingredients, your first typically 2 or 3 are going to be the bulk of what the ingredient is, and everything else is just going to be sprinkles or percentages.
100%. So whatever's listed first on the ingredient list, that's the biggest volume of that ingredient in the product. Whatever's listed last would be the smallest, right? So you're 100% correct with that. Another thing you mentioned there, and it brought to mind is, remember, usually the front of the label is something where they're trying to sell you the product, right? And we get this with my beloved peanut butter, high protein source. I wish peanut butter was a primary protein, right? I would be getting my protein in every
words matter. We can make it happen.
We could,
Just might not be true.
Might not be true. Moving on to the next section, consuming dairy products that meet the following requirements. So we're looking at dairy, recommended intake. The group includes milk, yogurt, cheese, fortified soy beverages. The soy beverages are fortified in calcium, vitamin A, vitamin D are part of the dairy group because they are similar to milk based on the nutrient composition that are used in meals. Other products sold as milks, parentheses milks, but made from plants, for example, almond, rice, and coconut, may contain calcium and be consumed as a calcium source. However, these plant products are not part of the dairy group because their overall nutritional content is not similar to dairy, milk, fortified soy beverages. The recommended amounts of dairy are 3 cups equivalent per day. Man, that was a lot.
That was a lot.
And here, remember, the benefit of dairy a lot of times is, and why it is recommended that we consume, is the calcium part of dairy. Okay. Now you can also get calcium from your green leafy vegetables. I always like to point that out. But this is why we get this generic version of, okay, consume 3 servings of dairy per day. Okay. Doesn't mean you can't have the coconut milk, almond milk, that type of stuff, especially if there's some allergens that you have in there, but just realize you're not getting the calcium in that from those products.
Yep. But again, like we talked about earlier, the food label may say that.
Correct.
On those.
Yeah.
However, again, if you look at the label, as far as the percentage of those things, bare minimal with those kind of things. So looking at the whole.
Yeah, and this is something I like to recommend a multivitamin as a supplement for everybody because it's kind of that minimal basis, right? So multivitamin will generally have that small amount of calcium in it, so you don't have to stress about it. You like almond milk? Cool, drink almond milk, right? You don't like cow's milk, you want to do almond milk, you want to do something else, totally fine, right? But once again, just taking this, okay, hey, generic recommendation, everyone should consume 3 cups of dairy. Just saying that is a great starting point. It's a great recommendation. Just fine tuning why and what is important from it. Okay. So next 2 things I want to read is the key nutrients and the considerations that go into dairy. So the key nutrients from the dairy group contribute many nutrients, including calcium, phosphorus, vitamin A, vitamin D, and in parentheses, products fortified with vitamin D. You get your vitamin D mainly from the sun. So get outside. That is the best way to get vitamin D. Your body will produce its own vitamin D. However, most people do need to supplement with vitamin D. That's an episode on a different day. Riboflavin, vitamin B12, protein, potassium, zinc, choline, magnesium, and selenium. Those will be the key nutrients from our dairy products. Considerations. Fat-free and low-fat 1% dairy products provide the same nutrients, but less fat. I kind of want to stop there because the nutrients are going to be different. Maybe not the calcium, maybe not that. And I mentioned this in episode 1. With animal products and dairy products, we want to make sure that we're getting grass-fed organic USDA because your omega-6 fatty acids will be higher inside a grain-fed product versus a grass-fed product. right? So grass-fed cow's milk is going to have a different nutrient profile than a grain-fed. But I get what they're saying here. It's the same nutrient value as far as macronutrients and some of the nutrients, but no, there is a difference.
We're talking like a subculture.
Correct. Here. But less calories. So once again, if you do the lower fat options of dairy, you are going to get less calories because it's going to have less fat in it. So that can save some calories if you are looking at reducing calories inside of your diet plan. Such as 2% whole milk and regular cheese, fat-free and low-fat milk or yogurts, comparison to cheese contain less saturated fats and sodium or potassium, vitamin A, vitamin D. Choose fat-free or low-fat dairy foods to limit the amount of saturated fat, which are still be benefiting with the potassium, the vitamin A, vitamin D in these products. Limit cheese as a dairy choice to further limit saturated fat and sodium intake. We'll touch on that. Soldiers who are lactose intolerant can choose from low lactose or lactose-free products that do not consume they do not consume dairy products. Should consume foods and provide nutrients generally obtained from dairy, including protein, calcium, potassium, magnesium, vitamin D, and vitamin A. So just talking about, those individuals or soldiers that would have lactose intolerant, how we could substitute in some stuff. Okay. Let's talk about saturated fat.
I think there's a lot that goes into that. And one thing that I think you're probably right out of this phase because you've probably got the babies now probably drinking whole milk now.
So ours has a lactose allergy.
Waterfall.
Yeah.
That's how that worked there.
Yes.
So we are not there yet. We're almost there. But going back with the boys, when we switched over to the whole milk, there's a reason that they want the baby consuming whole milk when you switch from formula or from breast milk.
Yep.
It's because it has all the additional things in there.
Yep.
However, as adults and Americans, we typically get all of that somewhere else.
No problem. And remember, lactose intolerant, it can happen. Yes, it can happen at birth. So with Bridget, our youngest right now, she has it. But we're slowly starting to include some dairy in her, see how she handles it, right? To see if she'll grow out of it. Okay. But also we produce an enzyme called lactase that breaks down lactose. And as you age, you can actually stop producing this enzyme. So people can become lactose intolerant later on in life. But as you mentioned, just because you're lactose intolerant doesn't mean like you're going to have to supplement with calcium. You can get it in other ways inside of your diet, especially if you're going back to the core concept that we teach. Eat a primary protein source with each meal and each snack, and eat produce with each meal and each snack, because those are going to have those good sources of nutrients in it.
Yep.
So the next two is, open up a can of worms. So this is going to be protein sources, right? So we'll love this section.
So not peanut butter.
Not peanut butter. Let's see what it says, peanut butter in here. Consume protein sources that meet the following requirements. Recommended intake. Foods in the protein group include choices from both animal and plant sources, including several subgroups: seafood, meat, poultry, eggs, nuts, seeds, and soy products. I'm going to continue reading, but we'll get back to that, right?
Peanut butter.
Yeah, because listen, I love nuts and seeds, but they're a fat source first, not a protein source. And that's where just different organizations will have different terminology when it comes to this. But I think this is why there's a confusion. It goes back to me, like if it's higher in protein, it's a protein source.
Yes.
If it's higher in carbs, it's a carb source first. If it's higher in fat, it's a fat source. Maybe that's me trying to be very simple, because simple is sexy, but that's just how I educate it.
Well, and I think nuts and seeds are one of those very complex foods because It's got a lot of everything. It's not like 1 gram of protein
Correct.
And 12 grams of something. It's got 6 to 12 of everything.
100%. Legumes may be considered part of the protein group as well as vegetable group. Okay, well, all right. Well, which one is it? Is it protein?
It's like a tomato and tomato.
Yeah, is it veggie? Protein is also found in some foods from other groups. For example, dairy. Yes, can be. But is there more carbs? We'll talk about it. A specific recommendation for at least 8-ounce equivalents of seafood per week is recommended as part of the healthy eating pattern. 1.5 ounces of nuts and seeds count as 1 ounce of protein because they're higher in calories. Soldiers eat them in small portions and use to replace other foods that are added to the diet. Okay. My teaching, and you've heard it over and over, is this: primary protein sources are meat, fish, eggs, some dairy, like cottage cheese and Greek yogurt, because those items will be higher in protein, lower in carbs and fats, and protein shakes. Those are your primary protein sources. Doesn't mean you don't get protein from nuts, seeds, legumes, and some plant products, but they're generally going to be higher in fat or higher in carbohydrates. So for me, a primary protein source is highest in protein to make it that. Doesn't mean you don't count the protein in your almonds that you consume towards your daily total. It's just I want you to think of almonds as a fat source first.
Well, and I think they did a great job, at least at this part, saying in moderations, like soldiers use these in small amounts, almost as a snack in theory, right?
Yeah.
But could you make that better by, doing a protein shake or maybe having some egg whites with it? Now, I don't know who's eating egg whites for a snack, but someone's doing it.
Yeah. I mean, you can stop at some gas stations now and they have boiled eggs. Consume at your own risk. All right. Key nutrients. Protein foods are important sources of nutrients in addition to protein. So it's not all about the protein, but we like the protein, including B vitamins. Okay. I'm not going to list them all out. Selenium, choline, phosphorus, zinc, copper, vitamin D, vitamin E. Nutrients provided by various types of proteins foods differ. For example, meats provide the most zinc. Also, poultry provides the most niacin. Seafoods provide more vitamin B12 and D, and also some healthy fats, right? So remember, inside, depending on which seafood it is, you can get a lot of omega-3 fatty acids out of the seafood products. Eggs provide the most choline, and nuts and seeds provide most vitamin E. Soy products are a good source of copper, magnesium, and iron. So is legumes. So kind of a key takeaway there would be is like eat a variety.
Yes.
Right? If you're eating a variety source of proteins, then you're going to get these different nutrients that are coming along with it, not just the protein intake from those products. Considerations. When selecting protein foods, nuts and seeds should be unsalted, and meats and poultry should be consumed from lean forms. I'm going to continue on, but I want to address that.
Yep.
Processed meats and processed poultry are sources of sodium and saturated fats. Processed meats and meats products that have been transformed through salting, curing, fermentation, smoking, and other processes to enhance flavor and improve preservation are not considered good. In parentheses, hot dogs, bologna, salmon, pepperoni, and bacon. Now, I want to point that out, right? Because a lot of times when you hear processed food, people think that like boar's head turkey is bad to make a sandwich with. And it's not. That's a good protein source. So when you think of processed meats, think of hot dogs, bologna, salami, and pepperoni. Okay, kind of think of that, because I put bacon in actually a fat source versus a protein source. And bacon's good. Saturated fats added, saturated fats, added sugar, and total calories are within limits and resulting in eating patterns. Choose fresh meat options more than processed meats. Intake sodium and saturated fat. Inclusion of protein from plants allow vegetarian options to be accommodated. Whew.
So I think going back to hit on sodium, I think is where we're going with this one, because I think it said nuts and seeds that are not salted, but then it also went into the meats and poultry and fish that are higher in sodium, which yes, they are, because we're probably adding seasonings and salts and those kind of things to it. But I think that with it, there's a, I wouldn't say miseducation, but there's misconsumption or under educated pieces around salt and where salt plays a piece with this. And I think it really goes back to the previous paragraph talking about the vitamins and the minerals and the consumption of it, because you have to have sodium in order to transport things.
Yes. And I talked about this in that first episode of the series. Like a healthy individual, unless there's congestive heart failure, unless there's something medical going on, we shouldn't restrict our salt. So most of you that listen to this, let's just say 1,000 of you guys that download this every episode, most of you need sodium, right? Because you're working out, you're sweating. Maybe not right now, you're not sweating as much because I feel like it's cold everywhere. It's cold in our hotel room right now, but you do need more electrolytes and sodium in your diet than 2,300 milligrams. Like I would only have someone on a restriction if I was in a clinical setting and there was congestive heart failure or something like that. So that's where I'm like, yes, this is a generic recommendation to not consume salted foods. And from a standpoint of sodium, I always recommend people keep it the same. That's my goal, is try, your sodium intake should remain relatively the same and consistent so that you don't have the fluctuations. When you have the fluctuations where it could affect the weight on the scale, just as an example.
Well, and I guess with this too, we're not saying don't consume, or it's not saying don't consume it. It's just saying choose specific things that you're not adding salt to it. So having salt isn't bad. It's just, again, goes back to moderation, or we're not trying to dump salt on every single piece of food that we eat.
But, like if a client comes in and say, hey, Jeremy, should I get salted or unsalted, mixed nuts? I'm going to say, hey, whichever one you like. Right? I'm okay with you having salted nuts, totally fine inside of the diet plan. Okay. A couple more chapters on this episode 2, or not chapters, sorry, a couple more sections on this episode 2, guys. We'll wrap this one up. Hope you guys are enjoying this. And once again, I think it's fun. And hopefully you take this with all your nutrition and exercise. When you read things either online or in books, you can kind of dissect it and be like, okay, that is a statement, but how does it affect me? Because these are generally general recommendations, right? Consume oils that meet the following requirements. Recommended intake: oils that are fats that are liquid at room temperature. Although they are not a food group, oils are emphasized as part of a healthy eating pattern because they're a major source of essential fatty acids and vitamin E. Commonly consumed oils extracted from plants, including canola, corn, olive, peanut, safflower, soybean, sunflower oils. Oils also are naturally present in nuts, seeds, seafood, olives, and avocados. The fat in some tropical plants, such as coconut, therefore coconut oil, palm kernel oil, and palm oil, are not included in the oil category because they do not resemble the other oils in their composition. They are solid at room temperature. Specifically, they contain a higher percentage of saturated fat. And in here it says saturated, in parentheses, it says unhealthy fats. No. And I do have, that, because I'm like, saturated fat coming from a natural source, I do not consider unhealthy. It's the saturated fats that are man-made that are classified as trans fats, or your saturated fats that are found in, and then we don't have it on this page, I think it was on this other page
earlier,
inside of cookies. Here it is, inside of cookies, cakes, and snack food. That is the saturated fats that we would want to stay away from. Okay. But I am okay with people who have, cook with coconut oil, want to have coconut oil inside of their diet. I'm totally fine with that from that aspect.
Well, and even take yesterday, we sampled a protein here at the conference, and it was a plant-based, and it had canola oil in it.
Yep.
And that was an ingredient that in the protein setting that I haven't seen. And typically we've got the rice and we've got the pea, which is, I feel like, the needs for those, but adding that canola gives it some more, I want to say, some fluff, some flavor, and more fulfilling at that point. And that's great for those options.
And especially for the consistency of it, right? Because that was a plant-based protein, and the consistency of it was not grainy, which you typically experience inside of plant-based. So, all right, last portion of today. Other dietary components. Limit consumption of added sugar, which I think we can all get on board with inside of the wellness community. Added sugars include syrups and other calorie sweeteners. When sugars are added to food and beverages to sweeten them, they add calories without contributing to essential nutrients. Consumption of added sugars can make it difficult for soldiers to meet their nutrient needs while staying within the caloric limits. That's something to really consider too. If I reverse that and said, individuals who are on a reduced caloric diet, it is going to be very difficult for you to hit your nutrient values to stay within your calories and still drop body fat by consuming a lot of simple sugars or added sugars. Okay. It's got general recommendation that, recommended healthy eating pattern limits less than 10% added calories per day. I don't really get into that, like saying 10%, because I think it's just hard math that we're worried about, right? The big thing is we should limit added sugars as much as possible, inside of the foods that we choose. For example, go back to peanut butter. I like peanut butter. So if you're choosing between two peanut butters and one's got added sugar and one doesn't, get the one without the added sugar, right? That's a product that you consume on a regular basis. Let's make the better decision on that. Soldiers need to limit sodium consumption. Eating patterns to limit sodium to less than 2,300 milligrams a day, right? Even though sodium is an essential nutrient needed by the body in relatively small amounts. So this is kind of elaborating on the other chapter. And then the last part of this, it talks about, consumption of alcohol and keeping alcohol at a beer a day, 5 ounces of wine, and 1.5 ounces of distilled spirits is the recommendation of one drink per day is what the recommendation.
I also find it funny that it has 40% alcohol. And so this is more up Jeremy's level because he doesn't consume higher approved things. However, there's a bigger plate.
So 40% would be 80 proof, right?
80 proof.
Yes.
80 to 90 is the sweet spot.
That's the sweet spot. 80 to 90 is the sweet spot when it comes to bourbon.
I prefer 120 to 130.
It's hot. So a lot of this, guys and gals, was a little bit to a degree, a review of what was in the beginning of it in episode 1. But hopefully you guys, once again, you're gaining the knowledge out of this, that a lot of statements that are out there, are broad statements, and how does that apply, to me? And I'll go back to like the added sugars. I have a lot of people right now that are listening to the episodes that are getting into endurance sports, right? Because I want people to find a hobby, physical hobby they enjoy. and I'm pushing bikes because hey, I like to ride
That's
bikes.
what you like to do.
Kids like to ride bikes. You got kids that enjoy it. It's a great time to spend together.
Yes.
But a lot of people are getting into like training for endurance sports. And that's where like you have to understand that just because something is added sugar, we use Coca-Cola, for example, it doesn't mean that you can't ever have it in the diet plan because, drinking on some Coke during an endurance event is going to have no negative consequences because your body's going to digest it really quick, but you're going to use it for fuel really quick. Right. But having a Coca-Cola at, dinner might not be the best wellness choice to make, right?
And keeping it simple. I mean, timing does matter, but also what you're doing matters.
100%.
But again, like you said, having one Coke randomly once a month isn't going to make it break anybody.
Yeah. So looking forward, guys. The next one's going to go into body composition, which we will do a little bit more education on because I had this on my list to educate on the different body fat tests or techniques that are out there, from DEXA scan machines to in-body machines to skin calipers. So we'll be doing a little bit more education outside of the chapter, the FM-22, because I had that on my list anyway. But we're going to get into the BMI, weight loss, weight gain, and then into event fueling. So it'd be a nice little kind of section of the FM-22, but also some general education that I wanted to provide anyway on some episodes. So appreciate you guys and gals listening. Make sure you go leave us a review if you have not left us a review in 2025. And if you guys have any topics that you want me to educate on, or any topics that you want to come in and educate on that are in your wheelhouse. So hopefully Brenton will be back on doing a lot more of the resilience side of things. And a lot more, I don't want to say it's mental health,
Cognitive.
There we go. Cognitive performance is his specialty. So hopefully we got him back on to go into a little bit more of that and those topics as we roll through the year. So we appreciate you guys.